Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to say, Mark, before we get into any of our conversation, big thank you for making time for this, and it really is lovely to have you with us today. So I'm going to say that first off the mark, and I'm also going to say for our audience, for everyone listening to this, so they know what's going on. Liam Hartree here, episode 496 of the Simply Inspired podcast, and today I'm connecting with Mark Dawes, spiritual teacher, successful entrepreneur, somebody who combines ancient wisdom with modern science to help a lot of people in different ways. A very humble person, but nonetheless somebody who actually has a lot of knowledge. So today we're going to be sharing a little bit of that in the hope that it helps you, our viewers and listeners. And as I always say, the intention behind these podcasts isn't to say, well, you have to follow this path or that path or do things this way or that way. It's just to say that maybe there are better ways of living, better ways of experiencing day to day life than you have currently become aware of. And maybe today, through hearing Mark's story and through hearing some of his advice and wisdom as well, there'll be a few things you can take away and practically apply. Plus, I'm sure there'll be some fun stories as well. So the entertainment is always there. Hopefully my sound is okay, guys. For most of our audience is used to this by now, but for anyone seeing this for the first time, I am here, working here by the sea, so fingers crossed the sound quality will be okay. But yeah, Mark, now we've got that out the way, just so people know what's happening. As I've already said, it really is lovely to be here chatting with you today. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Liam. Thank you for the invite.
No worries at all. And yeah, I mean, we'll talk about your life a little bit. One of the things that I've noticed is obviously the entrepreneurial side. So before we get into the spiritual aspect, which we will come into, or I should say, before we get into that intersection of spirituality and modern science, and I'll find out a little bit more about that. Can you share with us a little bit about where you're originally from, please, and just a little bit about your upbringing, just to set the scene? We won't go really deep into this, but people will be curious to know. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I was I was born and raised in London. We weren't. My family wasn't a rich family by a long shot. We weren't abjectly poor, but we weren't, by a long shot rich. And I grew up in a very happy family. My mother and father were very loving. I had four elder brothers and a sister. Um, and then I decided quite early on that I wanted to go into the services to join the armed forces. So at 16, I joined the Royal Navy. I spent 12 years in there. 8.5 years of that were working with what they call Naval Air Commando squadrons. And the Navy, I was as a child, by the way, I should frame this. I wouldn't say undisciplined, but I was always into mischief. I was always getting in trouble, not violent trouble or anything like that, but I wasn't, I wouldn't go with the norm. I'd always do my own thing. And the Navy taught me discipline. It taught me structure. It taught me a very good lesson in, don't ask stupid questions, and you can tell me what you're going to do, but just go and do it. So don't talk about it. Go and do it. And I think that work ethic and that sort of psychology stayed with me after I left. And after I left, I found it quite difficult. I had a number of jobs, and then all very, sort of average paid jobs, nothing major. But then I got a job with Apple Computers. I blagged my way into that, and I became a salesperson for them. And I actually ended up being the second highest paid sales consultant in the UK at one point. But then I mistakenly, because of my ego, I thought I must be a good business person. So I bought like a toning studio, a little ladies' gymnasium thing. And I realized being a good salesperson and a good business person aren't the same thing. And I lost a lot of money. I got the family into a lot of financial debt, approximately £80,000. We were threatened with losing the house, bankruptcy, and that was a dark period of my life when I thought, I've failed as a person, as a man, uh, and I even considered suicide as an option at that point. So it was pretty a dark time. And then I was given a book As to this day, I can't remember the name of the book. And the guy who gave me the book said, "Look, read this book." He said, "At the end of this book, provided you read it, if you still want to commit suicide, great, go and do it. But read the book first." So I thought, "Oh, I've got nothing to lose." So I read the book and something clicked. I think it was a Tony Robbins book, as I recall. And something clicked. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. I'm as low as you can get. So I started working again. I became a prison officer, became a hostage negotiator, did various things. And I then decided to run a training course and start a little business. Had no skill, no knowledge of how to run a business, but I started delivering training, and it went from strength to strength. And what I would say to anyone out there, if you're thinking about doing something, do it. Don't hesitate on it. Procrastination will kill your dreams. And that business, I mean, it had its ups and downs, but we ended up in probably 18 months paying off the debt that I owed, that I got us into. I invested in properties. Again, I didn't know what I was doing. My wife was the brains with that. And we started putting in, investing in other things, and we built a business and diversified in what we were teaching and training. And within a reasonably, I would say, short period of time, we went from running a basic self-defense course for 6 ladies, as we started off, to running a multi-six-figure business between the two of us. And we did that for 30 years, and I was probably at the time one of the, what's the right word I could say? I was quite well known for my expertise in the areas we were teaching. And that was great. We loved it. But I came to a point where my beliefs and my values, particularly my spiritual ones, were diverging with the business side of things. So my wife and I came to the decision that we'd give the business away. We didn't sell it. We gave it away. So we gave away this multi-six-figure business to two very good guys who are still running it today. And then I started deepening my meditation practice and my spiritual learnings and teachings. And the catalyst for that was that in 2019, I had a heart attack. And it was the strangest thing ever because everyone thought, they kept asking me, were you worried about dying and, were you scared? And I wasn't. It was the strangest feeling. It was very liberating. I thought, oh, great, I've got something now I can make a decision on. So from 2019 until the end of 2022, that's when we planned to give the business away. And yeah, that was, the whole catalyst for handing the business over. And then we retired, or early retirement, in December 22, and I just deepened my spiritual practice, meditation, prayer, reading, studying. And then people started reaching out to me on social media and various other channels. All of a sudden, I gained a couple of 100,000 followers that I don't know how. And I started helping people, with their problems and their needs. And that's fundamentally what I do now, really.
That's a remarkable story, Mark, and that's that's really. I'm just thank you for the coffee, by the way. Thank you. I just had one of these cold coffees they do in Cyprus, and oh yeah, thank you very much, Nicolette. One of the cold coffees. I'm still getting used to that aspect of Cyprus. Not hot coffees, not tea, but coffees with ice. It takes some getting used to. Anyway, Mark, that is a remarkable story. Now, in all honesty, as I've said before, I've seen some of your posts on LinkedIn and I've got the gist of some of these things, but there's a lot more there than I knew, even with some of the research that I've done. And there's a couple of things I'd like to touch on with that I believe will be helpful to people. One of them is you went through a dark time there. Your advice for people who are going through that time now, I feel, would be a beneficial topic to touch on, and then I'd like to ask you more about the spiritual side. But I don't want to overlook that because we live in a high pressure world, 24/7 world. A lot of people are struggling with these kinds of things, and you, as you mentioned, Tony Robbins, reading the book, finding your way out of debt, very inspirational. So if there are people who are in that frame of mind, shall we say, what would you say to them? What would be some advice you would give to them, please?
Well, the most precious thing on Earth is life. You know,
Mm.
we're only here for a short period of time. So I always say, don't give up on your own life, for starters, you know. But if you look at everyone who's achieved something of greatness, of value, they've all had that dark night of the soul. They've all been there. So this is an opportunity for you to put things into the right perspective. Because at the end of the day, whatever wealth we have or don't have, whatever possessions we gain or don't gain, you can't take them with you anyway, you know, and we're all going to die. You know, the ultimate goal is we all die. So what it taught me was that we're actually immortal beings in a mortal body. You know, this thing will end in its own time, but our spirit, our energy, whatever you wish to call it, will live on. It will continue in other forms. It will transcend. So I think, you know, if you can, and if you are suffering and you're in that dark night of the soul, as I call it, don't give up on yourself, you know, because you're going through it for a reason. And that reason may not be clear to you, but I'll guarantee you 1,000% that when you come out of it, you'll have a better perspective on life, and you'll probably be able to help so many people through your own experience. You know, so don't give up. That's what I say.
Very powerful advice there, my friend, and very valuable for people, I must say. Also, yes, I mean, facing death and that concept, something else that you mentioned there. The biggest fear for many people, I read somewhere actually that the biggest fear in the world is actually public speaking, and then dying is second. I don't know if that's true, but either way, we are here public speaking about dying, so that's an irony. But in the topic of facing death, as you said there, you weren't afraid and so forth, and you know you felt the liberating sense of that. May we go deeper into that process? And I know obviously a health condition as serious as that as a heart attack is, you know, quite a personal thing. But yeah, can we go deeper into that liberating aspect that you touched on there, please?
What about why the heart attack was liberating?
Yeah, basically, and just to go deeper into that feeling because it's not something that you hear every day. I mean, obviously these experiences when people have them, as you've already said, you know, you find that many people do great things, many people who awaken to the. You've already touched on this as well with the eternal soul. But is that the primary reason that you realized that you were more than this body? Is that why it was liberating?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I had the heart attack, like I couldn't breathe, you know, I couldn't walk 20 yards without being out of breath. And you have no option but to take sit down and relax. You know, you can't do anything, so you reflect on your life. And it all of a sudden it was like a truth exposed itself to me, if that's the right way to say it. And I think we all strive in the Western world. We all want success or a title or fame or money or a big house or whatever it is. And we live in one of the most technologically advanced eras that civilization has ever been in. Yet we have more suffering, more anxiety, more depression, more medication for illnesses, more you know, suicides and self-harm than ever before in history. So it makes you question, you know, what is it all about, really? You know, that's the question. You know, why are we here? And when I had the heart attack, I sort of sat back and I looked on this and I thought, right, you know, what's the message in this condition? And it was interesting because when I saw the doctors, they went through the usual thing. They said, well, you've got three options, which is open heart surgery, a stent, or all these medications for the rest of your life. And I thought, well, I don't really want an operation. I don't want open heart surgery. I don't want a stent. And I don't want to take medication. So I thought there must be another way. So I watched this documentary. It came up purely randomly on Netflix called Forks Over Knives about diet and how it relates to heart disease. So I thought, right. So I stopped eating meat, chicken, fish, and dairy on the spot. Just in one day, cut it all out. And my health got better. I was able to walk 3 miles a day and then 6 miles a day. And I thought, well, that's pretty remarkable just by cutting this stuff out. And I've always meditated, but it's always been something that I did if I had time. If I had a break, I'd meditate. It's like a lot of people pray. They do their work first, then they pray. And I thought, let's shift this around a bit. Let's make meditation the first part of the day, and expand on that. So I got in touch with some monks I know, and I said, look, I've had this heart attack. What can I do to heal it? Because I don't want the medication, I don't want the drugs, I don't want the operation. So they said, practice Tonglen. There's a particular meditation called Tonglen. So I started to practice that, and I just felt better. And it was amazing because 3 years, literally to the day, when I went for a checkup, the consultant was amazed. He said, we had to send your test results back 3 times. And I said, okay, why? He said, there's no scar residue on your heart. And I'm not a medical person, so I don't know. So I said, well, is there supposed to be? He said, yeah. He said, you've had a heart attack. So I said, oh, well, that's good then. He said, yeah, but how? I don't know how it happened. I said, well, I don't know how it happened. But then I read a book about a Buddhist monk called Fakyag Rinpoche, who was tortured by the Chinese. And just coincidentally, again, these coincidences seem to come into my life. And he was tortured by the Chinese. He escaped to America, and they found that he had gangrene in his leg, and they wanted to amputate. And he said no. And they said, if it gets above your knee, amputate this. And if it gets above your hip, you're dead. He said no. So he wrote to the Dalai Lama and said, what do I do? The Dalai Lama said, meditate, heal yourself. And this is the thing. The one thing I've learned on my journey is we all have the inbuilt capacity to heal ourselves. It's there. And 3 years, literally, to the day, his leg is gangrene free. He has no gangrene. And I thought, well, hang on. I've been meditating for 3 years and my heart's healed. I have no scar residue. This guy's been meditating for 3 years. He has no gangrene in his leg. It's completely healed. And in both cases, the medical fraternity were completely confused. So that's in itself is something that, why wouldn't you do it? We know that prayer heals. We know that meditation heals. And given the choice of meditation or medication, oh, there's no choice. Why stuff yourself full of pills that are going to carpet bomb your whole being when you can target yourself with meditation with no negative side effects whatsoever?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So going deeper into the spiritual side and these topics, obviously the self-healing is a very profound part of it. But you said also about meditating prior to that time when you had time and so on and so forth. So, and you mentioned there about contacting some monks that you knew. So you obviously already knew them somehow. So this actual spiritual interest, if you like, of yours. Actually, you also mentioned earlier another thing about the separation, if you like, between the so-called violent, the self-defense and prison officer work, hostage negotiation, etc., moving into a spiritual direction. So, where were or what were your first spiritual experiences of meditation? Where did you first become interested in that in the very beginning, even if it was on a casual basis of, meditating when you had time? Where did that first come into your life, Mark?
Well, I think from a very young age, I went to Sunday school. I was made to go to Sunday school, and I don't have much memory of that because I was a small child at the time. But my parents weren't religious people. They didn't go to church. Now, my father, interestingly, wanted to be a priest when he was young, and a priest completely put him off being a priest. So my parents adopted this attitude that you don't have to go to church to be Christ-like. You can be Christ-like through your actions. So there's always been that there, but I never really bought into it. And I suppose in many ways I rebelled against it. I used to get into mischief and, do all martial arts and boxing and all sorts of things, to avoid it. But when I was in the prison service, I did a course on stress consultancy and I became a stress consultant. And they were talking about breathing and everything else. And I thought, well, this is basically meditation. But when I mentioned it, They all went, "Oh no, we don't do any of that weird stuff. That's for weird people. This is just breathing." And I thought, yeah, but you know, there's got to be something in it. So I always knew there was something there. And I looked for, at the usual, I suppose most people do the same. You look for something that fits you. So I went to various churches to see if that worked, and it didn't. In fact, a lot of ministers and priests got on my nerves, if I'm being honest, because their dogmatic approach to the holy and their attitude irritated me. And I didn't believe there's some guy in a cloud with a long white beard and that's where God lives. I just couldn't get my head around that concept. So I was searching and searching for stuff. And then, one day I met this monk, and it was a really bizarre set of occurrences because when I left the Royal Navy, I was angry and I had a temper, and I was honestly terrible. I would pick a fight with someone walking down the road. I was absolutely a horrendous person. And a friend of mine said, "Look, uh, I'm going to take you to a party." And I said, "Oh, I'm not going to a party because I don't, you know what will happen." He said, "No, no, no." He said, "I'm coming with you." He said, "You'll be fine." So begrudgingly, I went to this party, and everyone was dancing and singing and doing whatever they do, drinking. And I went in there and was doing what I do, checking all the exits, sizing everyone up. I looked around the room, and in the corner of the room, sat at a table, was a Buddhist monk in all his robes. And I said to my friend, "What's with the monk? Is it fancy dress?" He said, "No, he's come for you." And I went, "Me?" He went, "Yeah, I've arranged it." So I went over to this monk and he beckoned me to sit down. So I sat down and he started talking to me. And he wasn't talking about Buddhism. He was talking about quantum physics. This was the crazy part. But he had a very soft, gentle voice. So I had to lean in to listen. And as I was leaning in, I felt him kick me in the shin with his little sandal feet. So I looked down, I looked at him and I said, "You kicked me." He went, "When?" I said, "Just now." He said, "Who?" I said, "You did." He said, "Did it hurt?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, don't worry about it. It's gone." And he carried on talking. So I looked at my friend and he went, "Just listen to him." So I was leaning in and then he kicked me again. And I said, "You just kicked me." He said, "Who kicked you?" I said, "You did." He said, "When?" I said, "Just now." He said, "Did it hurt?" I said, "No." He said, "Then why are you worrying about it? It's gone. Just leave it." And carried on talking to me. Anyway, he did it a third time and we had the same conversation. I said, "Look, monk or not," I said, "if you kick me one more time, I'm going to put you on your ass." And he went, "Why?" I said, "Because you kicked me." He said, "But it didn't hurt, did it?" I went, "No." He said, "And it's in the past." Yeah, he said, "So why do you want to react like that?" And I went, "Because you kicked me." And he just gave me a bit of paper. He said, "Next Tuesday, come to this address at that time. I'll see you then." And he left. And it was a Buddhist temple in London, in North London. I looked at my friend and I went, "Is he serious?" And he went, "Yeah." He said, "And I've arranged for you to go twice a week for the next few months." So out of curiosity, really, I went up there and I remember getting to the door of this temple and the doorbell was there. And I went to press it and I couldn't. My finger just would not press that doorbell. So he opened the door and he said, "Oh," he said, "that bell never works for people who don't press it. Come in." So I went in and it was like a normal place. We were chatting and he said, "Come into the meditation hall with me." I went, "Why?" He said, "We'll meditate together." I said, "No, I don't. I don't do all that stuff." And he said, "You breathe, don't you?" I went, "Yeah." He said, "It's only breathing." So I went in there with him and we started breathing. And he was talking to me as I was doing it. And I just felt this complete calm come over me. I'd never felt anything like it before. And we finished this meditation. I don't know how long it was. And I left. And he said, "I'll see you in whenever, I think it was Thursday." I said, "I'll see you Thursday." I said, "Okay, I'll come back." And he said, "One question. He didn't say, why didn't I? He said, why couldn't you press the doorbell?" And I didn't have an answer for him. He said, "When you come back on Thursday, see if you have an answer." And what he did was he basically gave me a cone. He gave me something to think about. And I kept thinking about it and thinking about it, which was a form of contemplative meditation, I suppose. And the reason I couldn't press the doorbell was this. I could deal with people who were aggressive. I could deal with people who were violent. I could deal with that. I'm conditioned to that. I couldn't deal with people who were nice to me. And that was the reason I couldn't press the doorbell. And that really was, I suppose, the start of my real deep interest in meditation, because I thought, how can this guy be so understanding with a person like me when I could be potentially violent and angry all the time? So that's what really sort of, I suppose, got me on the path.
That's an incredible story. I mean, that is absolutely. I tell you what, I know that the whole man on a cloud thing didn't do it for you, and it doesn't really do it for me either. But quite possible hearing that story that a guardian angel or something like that was looking out for you, because that's quite something. So you couldn't deal with people who were nice to you at that point, okay? And I must admit, I have a personal interest in this question because I've had actually a similar problem, and I'm not going to go off topic with that. But I have to ask, why was that? I mean, was it just the fact that violence and that sort of behavior was so normal to you due to your experiences, due to growing up, your upbringing, or something in the background, or like a self-esteem thing? Or if you don't mind me asking a slightly more personal question there, Mark,
No,
with that
no.
process, why you couldn't ring the bell?
I mean, I grew up in a very male-dominated family in the 60s. I had three older brothers. One of them was a professional boxer. They were all very capable in their own right. And, you were always taught it, stand your ground, never back off, stiff upper lip, all the things they tell you as men. And then, of course, at school, I would never back down. I would always stand my ground. I would fight. I learned to box. And I learned to box so I could learn to fight. That's the only reason. Into the Royal Navy. And the Royal Navy, by the way, didn't make me violent at all. They gave me discipline and structure. But I suppose I had that core thing within me that I kept feeding, with because we all have the seeds of everything inside us. We have the seeds of happiness, we have the seeds of joy, we have the seeds of anger. It depends which ones you water with your thoughts, and I was always watering them ones. And then when I left the Navy because of a disagreement that I felt the Navy had broken their word on something, which made me very angry. And I was always blaming external situations for that. So that's where I developed this sort of conditioning, for want of a better word. I conditioned myself to be like that. I saw everyone as different. I saw everyone as a potential threat. So I didn't trust people wholeheartedly. I mean, the guys in the Navy I'd die for. I mean, it's a different camaraderie in there. But when you come back out into civilian life, it's hard work. So that all stemmed from me. Now I can say, oh, it was my brothers. I can say it was the environment. I can say it was the teaching. I can say it was this. But now, when I look back at it, I had a choice, and I made the wrong choices. So I started making better choices, I suppose, is the simplest way.
Well, that's a very inspirational message because, yeah, I mean, the whole macho thing, which is very, very prevalent today, and it's the same in so many places where I come from originally in Wales. It's the same. It's the same so many places. So it's and by the way, I mean, for anyone listening to this, I'm not saying it's a negative thing either, but it's very much how you use that energy. Okay, so that was the whole Buddhist meditation and so forth, and this side of things. But you also mentioned that later on there was kind of this divergence of the self-defense and some of the other things you were doing. And you mentioned earlier that there was sort of more and more of a contrast also in your professional life. I don't just mean personally, but you also mentioned with regards to what you were teaching. And although we've already touched on it, I would like to go a little bit deeper into that process, please, Mark, because it illustrates um, how do I put it? I mean, it illustrates the identity, really. I mean, it illustrates very much, as you said there, the seeds you're choosing to water, and to a certain extent, other aspects of yourselves, which it sounds to me were almost hidden underneath, in a way, and underneath this aggression. So later on in life, now I believe we're talking about when you started to feel that separation between, say, teaching self-defense and these things, and the spiritual path. can we go a little bit deeper into what was going on internally at that time? Because even what you said earlier about giving the business away, and not selling it, but giving it away to people who are still running it now, I thought, wow, I mean, actually, that's pretty cool. But it's certainly not something you hear every day. So I don't have a really narrow question about this aspect, but just that whole process for you. Can we go a little bit deeper into that, please? Because I believe there's some really good lessons in there.
In terms of sort of specifically what, Liam? Sorry.
In terms of the separation, so you mentioned earlier that at a point in time you were teaching self-defense, you were doing all of these things, but your spiritual beliefs at that time, you noticed a deeper separations between the path you were on, business-wise and professionally, and the meditation and when these things were deepening. And I believe this is a little bit forward in your life. You touched on that earlier about, I think it was around the time of giving your business away rather than selling it. And I would like to go deeper into that process because what I mean by this, Mark, to give you context of why I'm asking, we've spoken about like how you met the monk, right? This story, why did you kick me and all of that. It's amazing. But then even going forward with that, you were still, as I understand it, you were teaching self-defense and you were doing, as you mentioned, prison service, and there was still this aggression, this violence in your life. But you mentioned also that there was a later time when you started to move away from that and actually teach these principles that you learned rather than just using them in your own life. And I'd like to go into that process if that
Okay, I'm
gives
with
it a
you.
bit more context as where I'm going with it. Sorry.
Yeah, I suppose when I started teaching self-defense, it was a natural thing for me to do. So I was using my energy, my anger, and channeling it in a way that became quite a successful business. And I have to say this now, there's no problem with anyone teaching self-defense out there, no problem at all. Just if you're following a spiritual path, it doesn't mean that you can't defend yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't defend someone else. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Mm.
But for me, it would, whether it was self-defense or physical restraint or whatever the thing was, it was the fact that I was in business. And I think it was the commercial aspect of what I was doing that was diverging from the spiritual path because there's only so many shirts you can wear. There's only how much money you need. It's like I used to change my car every 3 years. I'd buy a brand new car. Accountant would tell me to do it. I'd buy another car. And I started thinking, well, why do I need another car? Maybe there's a tax advantage in it. But the car's got four wheels and engine, keeps me dry in the rain and takes me from A to B. It doesn't matter what I drive. And my values started to change. Instead of rushing around and I mean, you know what business is like. Everyone's you're on a hedonic treadmill, for want of a better word. You do one thing and you achieve it, then you set yourself another goal and there's another carrot and you just keep on going, you keep on going. And you pay the price for that. I wasn't around when my kids were at school. I wasn't there for birthdays and holidays and things like that in the early years. I think in the first 5 years of setting the business up, I hardly saw the family. Now, the benefit to that is that that business has allowed me to provide for the family in ways I couldn't have done had I been stuck in a 9 to 5 job. But you get to a point where you start to think, well, how much more do I need? And who is it actually helping? And why am I doing this? And that's when you start to ask the deeper questions, like, well, what happens if I can't do this tomorrow? What will I have achieved? What happens when I die? What will I be known for? Will I be known as this guy who was good at teaching self-defense? And I started to ask these questions, and then I'd contemplate on them and I'd think about them. And when it came point to leave the business, my wife and I both decided to retire early. Initially we thought, well, we'll sell the business, and we had offers for the business, but I was the face of the business, so people wanted me to do a 2 year golden handcuff deal or a 5 year golden handcuff, and I didn't want to do it. I just wanted to say, no, I'm out of this now. And it was, I suppose, a lack of motivation for this Western commercial culture that we've built for ourselves. And I mean, I've studied marketing, I've studied business, I've done all these things in my career. But when you start to look at it, you actually see how manipulative it is. We don't buy what we want. Sorry, we don't buy what we need, we buy what we want. And that want is being fed all the time. And I think Sam mentioned it when Sam Childers, the machine gun preacher, I was having a chat with him. You know, they do gourmet dog food in America, apparently. I don't know, it's gourmet dog food. But the amount of money that's spent on gourmet dog food, just in the United States of America, according to Sam, would feed all the starving people in the world. We've got things wrong. That society is getting things wrong. And then I started looking at what does fighting actually achieve? Well, wars never end wars. You know, wars just create more wars. Conflicts create more conflicts. We've got massive things happening in the world right now. We hear of Ukraine, we hear of Gaza. You've got issues in the Congo, which no one knows about going on. But when you try and fight fire with fire, if you like, you just create more fire. It doesn't solve the problem. History's shown us this time and time again. And I was reading a book by Mother Teresa, which really, set a light bulb off in my head. And someone asked her, "Why don't you ever attend anti-war rallies? You're a pretty prominent figure, a peace-loving figure. Why don't you attend anti-war rallies?" And she said something along the lines of, "Well, anti-war rallies create more war." She said, "If you have a peace rally, I'll come." So even down to the narrative we use, even down to the words that we speak, it's fundamentally important that we get those basics right. Christ talked about this in the Bible. He said a man is not defiled by what goes in his mouth, he's defiled by what comes out. The Buddha says the same thing. The Tao says the same thing. All the great religious books all say the same thing. And we're very loose with our language. We're very lazy with our language. It's like even in business, you hear things. You've got to be an aggressive business person to get what you want. You've got to fight for every. All this that narrative is wrong. It's totally wrong. So it was changing the culture within me that brought me to a point where I thought, well, it doesn't matter what business it was, whether it's self-defense and frustration or whatever. If I was running a rental car business, I suppose I'd have probably moved away from that. It was the narratives that go on within the business that are fed, all the time by other people spouting the similar narratives that are not healthy. You know, I mean, when you have a positive, put in perspective, when you have a negative thought, then you release something like 1,200 toxins from your brain into every one of the 50 or so trillion cells in your body that toxify those cells instantaneously. When you have a positive thought, you create 1,400 nutrients, or somewhere around that amount, that go to every cell in the body and nurture it. Now, cells need nutrients to communicate. So if you toxify them, they can't communicate, and we end up with sickness and illness and disease. So it's not even what we say, it's what we choose to think that's vitally important. And I was reading a book the other day, it might have been one of Thich Nhat Hanh's books. And when he was a young novice monk, a mosquito landed on his arm, and he went to hit it, to kill it. And then he realized that killing's wrong because he lives a non-violent life. So he stopped himself killing it. And his master at the time, his Buddhist teacher, said, "Why didn't you finish the job?" And he said, "Well, killing's wrong." He said, "But you've already had the thought. So you're 90% done it anyway." So we have to eliminate the thinking practices behind the narrative. Because it's okay. It's like people who go to church. My wife's a church secretary. I don't knock people who go to church. But I see it. That's why I don't go. They go. I call them Sunday Christians. They go to church on a Sunday and they sing their hymns and do their prayers and do whatever. And you go and have a cup of tea with them afterwards. And it's human nature. They'll say, "Oh, have you seen what so and so's doing? Isn't so and so being a pain in the ass?" And you think, well, you've just undone everything that you've just agreed not to do in the house of God. So it's yeah. Did I go off point there? I wandered a bit.
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah, it sort of makes a lot of sense going all the way back to what you said earlier about the whole gangrene and healing the leg and how you healed your heart and everything, connecting that with the thoughts. And Yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh is somebody. In fact, I think it was something to do with him that you posted when I first came across your profile. Somebody reshared it, and that was actually how I came across you. But anyway, that's another story. It makes a lot of sense. I have to ask a question here, man. I mean, what are your thoughts on like a higher power or something like this these days? Because I understand that people within church, yeah, they um my dad used to say that a lot of churches give God a bad name. In a sense, it might be something there, but the way they're using it human wise is not so good. But in terms of that, because you mentioned earlier about the eternal soul and about the fact of being more than just a body, and this is something else that fascinates me about you in this sense, is obviously you combine, as I understand it anyway, correct me if I'm wrong, you combine a number of different traditions as well as the Buddhism aspect, even though the meditation is a big aspect. First of all, am I correct in saying that, please, with the teaching that you do, that you bring different modalities, if you like, or different traditions into play with what you teach?
Yeah, I do. I mean, Buddhism and Christianity are obviously the main two. I do study the Vedas, study them. The Tao, I've studied.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I look at them. I suppose the one that interests me the most is Buddhism. I find that my major interest. But I do look at the others, and I suppose the reason I do it is I'm the original doubting Thomas. When someone says to me, "Well, this is what they say," I say, "I want to prove it." Don't. It goes back to the Navy. Don't tell me about it. Show me. That's what I want to see it. So yeah, I bring a lot of different angles on that perspective into play, if you like.
And what are your thoughts now, having had the experiences, all of the experiences that you've had in your life, on the whole concept of a higher power and whatever name I don't get caught up in names, but uh, okay, it's not, I don't think it's a man on a cloud either, right? But I am going to come out of the box and say this, that I've also had a lot of experiences in my life with serendipities and things I can't explain, and kind of like how you met the monk, right? And some people would look at that and say, okay, my friend set that up, it's a coincidence. But I also look at it, I've had far too many coincidences for them to be coincidences, and they generally speaking lead in a direction. Now you can choose to say no to it, obviously, but they still do lead in a direction. And as a person who's had those kinds of supposed, from a certain perspective, synchronicities, serendipities, and things in your life, do you think that there's any type of higher power behind that, in your own view, in your own opinion of this topic?
Well, I'll answer that fully in a second, but if we don't, then we're saying we are the ultimate. It stops and ends with us. And if you look at the human race, uh, we're supposed to be the most intelligent species on the planet because we have this brain that can conceptualize and invent and create and all these things. But we cause more destruction than any other animal on the planet. We're the most destructive animal there is. So, do I believe there's a higher power? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Do I believe that higher power is God? Yeah, probably, but not in the sense that most people would relate to that, where they see God as something external. I mean, you can call it by many names. You can call it God. You can call it, if you want to get scientific, you can call it the quantum or 0 point field. You know, in Islam, they'll call it Allah. But the thing with it is, what I've learned is it's beyond explanation. You can't explain it. You have to experience it. So let's just take the Buddhist view for a minute. The Buddhists believe that emptiness is the ultimate truth. Now, when you mention emptiness to people, they think, oh, well, emptiness means there's nothing there. But if I have a cup of your iced coffee and I pour the iced coffee out, you can say that cup is empty. Well, it's empty of iced coffee, but it's full of something else now. It's full of air.
Mm,
So emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. It means that emptiness means that everything is connected to everything else. There's no separate self. So what I've learned is that you and I are not separate entities. Okay, we're interconnected. So if you take a flower, that flower is not a separate entity because without the soil, without the sun, without the rain, without the insects, it couldn't flourish. It couldn't go from a seed to being a beautiful flower. So, as human beings, we're not separate. I'm the continuation of my parents and their grandparents and all the lineages that go back. And you think about that for a moment. For one human being to exist based on their lineage in the past, with all the wars and diseases and everything that's come along, this is a pretty miraculous thing. But I can't exist without the sun. I can't exist without the rain. I can't exist without oxygen. Try holding your breath for 10 minutes, you'll soon find out. So we are, although we're empty of a separate self, we're not separate. We're full of everything in the cosmos. Now, you take quantum physics to back this up. When two particles are entangled, so they're connected, when you separate those particles, once they've been connected, if you separate them, if you do something to this one moves in the same way without time delay. So that means you can separate them, and they've done this many times all over the Earth, and I believe in space as well. They've separated these particles by hundreds, if not thousands of miles, and when they change the direction of one, the other one changes instantaneously. No time delay. That's called entanglement. Now, let's go back to the Big Bang. And whether people believe in the Big Bang or the Adam and Eve story, it doesn't matter. I just want to look at the science bit of this. Before the Big Bang occurred, all the matter in the universe was condensed into something no bigger than apparently the size of a pea. Now, it was very dense, very heavy, and very hot. But when that pea exploded into being, and everything that came from it, it created all the stars, all the planets, all the universes, and the same minerals and composites within that pea created the life on Earth and the trees and the rocks and the animals. It was all joined at one point in something no bigger than the size of a pea. So that means we're all interconnected. We're all there. Now, people, if you think you are something special, something separate, you're missing the point. And this is the duality of the life we live on a day-to-day basis. And this is why we suffer, because we see things as different. We see things as separate. And therefore, discrimination comes in, anger comes in, jealousy comes in, hatred comes in. But we're all the same. The air we breathe, contained within the oxygen of this planet, the air we breathe is recycled air. So with every breath we take, we're breathing in atoms that could have once existed in the body of Christ or the Buddha or Adolf Hitler and Stalin even. Yeah. So just by breathing and living, we're all interconnecting. We breathe in oxygen that the leaves and the trees and the plants create for us. Without the trees and the plants, we probably wouldn't have any oxygen. So going back to your question, do I believe in a higher being? Yeah, yes, I do. Absolutely. But you can't give it a name and set it apart. Because if you set it apart, you're now contradicting everything that all the truth tells us, that everything is empty of a separate self and everything is inherently interconnected. And in the Bible, it states this for those Christians watching. Yeah. You are made in the image of God. Yeah. And in the scriptures, it says that you are a God. So we all are gods, and we have God inside us. And in Buddhist scripture, it tells us that everything you need to do whatever you want to do, heal, be successful, live a good life, already exists inside you. You don't have to look externally. But the Western world has created this concept of separation. Go into any workplace, you'll see people partitioned off, or working in separate booths. Houses fenced off from one another. People are conditioned to be separate, and as a result, we've lost sight of ultimate truth. And I believe that our role on Earth as human beings is to find our way back to that ultimate truth and higher being, whether that be God to you, the 0 point field, Allah, whatever name you want to give it. All roads lead to Rome.
Makes a lot of sense, and I find it fascinating because I've also been exploring the the connection, if you like, between these different scriptures and the fact that there's a lot of correlations between them, obviously, as we've touched on here. But you've taken that forward a number of levels, and respectfully, you've had more time to work on it than I have, so it makes sense. But it actually does make a lot of sense, and it's actually a very profound worldview. And this is why I'm trying to share these kinds of messages, is if people can realize some of these simple truths, simple to understand, a bit more practice to apply, obviously. But if people can understand them, then, what a different world that we would live in. And I wouldn't say that I'm really an idealist either, but I do very much believe in the fact that we can educate people to think differently, behave differently, interact with each other differently, and all of these things, and create the cliche concept of the ripple effect. And even today, we've played a small part in doing that. Now, Mark, I'll have to go fairly shortly, but before I do, with regards to your teaching and everything that you do, if people would like to find out more from you, or learn from you directly in some way, some people will listen to this and that will be enough for them, but I feel that some people will get the pull of saying, okay, I like what this guy is saying. And as I understand it, you do still teach, because I see your posts about meditation and different things. How can people get in touch with you? And by the way, I know this goes so far beyond the commercial aspect now, but as a calling, that in the sense you're not just teaching these things, you are living them, you are embodying them, if you like. Some people will be drawn to connect with you more personally. So how can people contact you to find out more about your knowledge in this area, please?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a website now. Did away with all that because I'm retired. But I have quite a following on Instagram. I'm on there as Mark Dawes QT. I mean, you found me on LinkedIn. I don't really post a lot on LinkedIn. It's a business networking platform, but I might put the odd thing on there. I have a YouTube channel, which is at Mark Dawes. I have Facebook pages. Mark Dawes Quantum Thinking is a page I have on there. But yeah, Google me. I'll probably come up. But I got an interesting story for you just before we go. We were talking earlier on about higher power.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
was I was at a church about 6 months ago, and talking to a minister, and he was being a bit dogmatic, and he said to me, he said, if you don't do this, he said, God will punish you. And I said, no, I won't. And he said, what do you mean, no, I won't? He said, are you saying you won't do it? I said, no, I said, I won't punish me. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you said if I do this, God will punish me. I'm telling you, I won't punish me. And I walked off and left him, and he followed me. And he said, are you saying that you're God? I said, well, are you saying that we're not? And he said, that's blasphemy. And this is the thing, even with ministers and priests, some of them, they they think that's blasphemy. It's not. It's written in scripture that you are a God. Now I don't mean, there are probably different levels of God. I don't know. But just an old shout out for my good friend Sam. You take Sam Childers. Yeah. He was a violent, illiterate, drug running youth. Yeah. He didn't tell you this. He used to have a stutter. Yeah. And some higher power worked on him and took this guy with a stutter that couldn't read, couldn't write, and he's now saved thousands of children and building multiple businesses in East Africa to help these kids. He couldn't have done that on his own. And he knows that, and he tells me that. Nothing we do in our life is purely down to our own effort. Even the Bible says it. God will help you if you put God first, but you've got to do the work. And you could apply that to Buddhism, science, if you like, any of the ancient um, spiritual traditions.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Sam Childers as well. What an inspirational guy. And absolutely, I noticed that actually with the stutter. I noticed there might be, he didn't say, but I heard that there might be something there. But the things he's overcome, the way that he's transformed himself, if we're looking at identity from that perspective, and obviously that's also a non-linear concept, but if we are looking at it linearly, the way that he's transformed himself, I was absolutely blown away by hearing that. But that's another story. Mark, that's a wonderful way to close out. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to share this. And going back to what I was saying just now about the whole serendipities and things, part of the reason I create these, even though I've got other businesses and other things I do, is to share this because the right people at the right time for them, I believe, will be drawn to it or connect with it or whatever. Kind of like you and the monk in a way, in the sense that the good thing about a podcast, we can put this out today and people will listen to it and that's great. But then 5 years from now, somebody might listen to it at the point when they are ready. And that's a big part of why I really appreciate you taking the time to share this. I appreciate the things you've shared about your own life, the vulnerability, the things you've overcome, but also going deeper into the topics. And perhaps we can talk again at some point and go deeper into some of the quantum sides of things. That's also a possibility. But for today, absolutely wonderful. And like I said at the beginning, those twin intentions, of your life story, relatability, accessibility of the spiritual path, and then some of the bigger picture topics. We've ticked those boxes and then some. So I really, really appreciate it. And I really appreciate everything that you've taken the time to
No, thank
share.
you. You're doing a wonderful thing in doing what you're doing. And doing it for the reasons you're doing it for is to help people. There's no greater service that you can give to help people. So it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do my best. I've been through a lot of transformation also, and it sort of follows on from my background with the photojournalism and everything I used to do, and it initially followed on from that with athletes, and then as my spiritual journey has opened up, then the interviews have gone in that direction. But no, I really appreciate you being a part of this, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you, honestly, hand on heart, and I'd love to connect with you again. I will have to run because today is one of those days where everything is run kind of 10-15 minutes late. Not much, just 10-15 minutes. And so then my next meeting is waiting for me now, in all honesty. But nonetheless, I really, yeah, really appreciate it. And 100%, I would like to keep in touch with you. I'll send this to you when it's released, but I have a couple of other ideas to potentially collaborate as well. So I'll be in touch with those and we'll go from there. But for now, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, the present moment, the only moment we have. Enjoy it, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks, Liam. You take care.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.